Alright, stop scrolling. This is the one. Go to sleep. The complete Roman Empire saga. 400 years, all in one place. I've spent over 2 years of my life crafting this series, all by myself. Over 20 hours of content, bringing you the ultimate chronicle of Rome. From the golden age of Augustus to the peak under Trajan, through the chaos of the 3rd century crisis. See Diocletian's reforms, Constantin's new capital, and the final split after Theodosius. This was a massive undertaking. If you appreciate the effort, a like and subscribe means the world. No time. Hit save for later, so you don't lose it. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Roman MP. Let us now journey together, back through the mists of time, to the classical world of the Roman Empire. There is an old saying about the great tides of Roman power. What is long divided may not necessarily unite, but what is long united will inevitably divide. The empire of the early 4th century was a testament to this truth. Following the momentous abdication of the great reformer Diocletian, the intricate system of the tetrarch, why he had designed to ensure stability shattered, plunging the Roman world into a vortex of civil war. The situation became so chaotic that at one point, a bizarre spectacle unfolded where no fewer than 8 men simultaneously claimed the title of Augustus. From amidst these smoldering fires and swirling clouds of war, a singular, dominant figure emerged: Constantine the Great. A master of both the battlefield and political intrigue, he navigated the treacherous, thorny path of internecine conflict, eliminating one rival after another. Finally, in the year 324 AD, he stood victorious, having once again unified the vast Roman Empire under a single ruler. During his reign, he was a whirlwind of activity. He repelled barbarian incursions on the frontiers, stabilized the internal administration of the state, commissioned the construction of a magnificent new capital, and initiated a series of bold reforms. Under his firm hand, the aging Roman state, already showing signs of muni and minus old age, decline, experienced a remarkable resurgence, a true restoration of central authority. Alas, the grand trajectory of history is a force too powerful to be diverted by the will of a single individual, no matter how great. The emperor's own governance was far from flawless, and more tragically, his administration of his own family proved to be a catastrophic failure. His eldest and most capable son, Crispus, a brilliant general in his own right, fell victim to a dark storm of court intrigue, was executed on his father's orders. With Crispus gone, the future direction of the empire became shrouded in an unnerving fog of uncertainty. In the year 337 AD, at the age of 60-5, Constantine I breathed his last. In his final days, he made arrangements to entrust the vast lands beneath his rule to the 5 young men of his family, his 3 sons and 2 nephews. His dying wish was that they would cooperate with sincerity and unity to jointly protect the integrity of the empire. Who could have imagined that the moment the old father closed his eyes, his children would immediately raise their butcher's knives against their own kin? A purge, one of the most brutal and bloody in the entire history of the Roman Empire, was about to begin. In the year 337 AD, as the life of the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great ebbed away in a villa near Nicomedia, the news of his impending death spread like wildfire. The imperial son, who was geographically closest to the capital, Constantitius, immediately set out with all speed. He arrived just in time to see his father for the last time. On May 22nd, Constantine died. A grand and solemn funeral procession began its long journey from Asia Minor towards the new capital, Constantinople. In accordance with his father's final wishes, Constantitius I presided over the funeral arrangements. The emperor's body was adorned with all the vestments and symbols of greatness. Dressed in the imperial purple robe, a diadem placed upon his head, The body lay upon a golden bed. It was placed in the main hall of the palace, which had been specially prepared for the lying Minos in Minos state, a chamber made resplendent with gold and illuminated by a sea of flickering lights. The ceremony of paying respects continued with the same strict protocol as if he were still alive. A formal and magnificent tribute filled with the utmost honor and sorrow. Besides Constantius, Constantine's the half-Minos brothers, Dalmatius and Julius Constantius, along with numerous other members of the imperial clan, all participated in this grand funeral. Immersed in the grief of losing their kinsmen, they could not have known that they would soon be joining their patriarch in the next world. The moment the imperial funeral concluded, Constantius II moved with astonishing speed and ruthlessness to seize control of the situation in Constantinople. His sharp and decisive actions immediately cast a tense and nervous atmosphere over the capital. Facing the anxious and uncertain members of the imperial family, Constantius assured them that he would stabilize the situation and guarantee their personal safety. However, it was not long before this new monarch, a young man of only 20-1, tore off his mask of hypocrisy. He produced a document, a supposed last will and testament of his father, which he claimed to have received from the hands of Eusebius, the bishop of Nicomedia. This document made a shocking declaration. Constantine had suspected that he was being poisoned by his own brothers undemanded, that his sons avenge his murder. This sudden and terrible accusation stunned everyone. Constantius gave the accused no opportunity to defend themselves. Without hesitation, he raised the bloody sword of retribution. The emperor's uncle, Julius Constantius, was hunted down to his own palisade, along with his eldest son, whose name is not recorded in the annals of history, was cut down on the spot. Another uncle, the elder Dalmatius, and his second son, Hannibal, who had been given the grandiose title King of Kings and ruled over Pontus, were also abruptly slain, their blood pooling on the palace floors. Dalmatius's other son, also named Dalmatius, who controlled the territories of Thrace, Macedonia, and Greece, was not in Constantinople at the time. But his distance did not save him. He was soon murdered by his own soldiers, likely at Constantius's instigation. Thus, an entire branch of the family was neatly reunited in the afterlife. In this single, bloody family purge, Constantius II eliminated 2 of his uncles and 7 of his cousins. In terms of sheer numbers, he surpassed his own father, Constantine. Truly a case of the student outdoing the master. Of course, one might argue that the quality score of Constantine executing his own biological son, Crispus, was a feat his successor could not match. In addition to the victims mentioned above, the purge consumed others connected to the family by marriage. Flavius Octavius, who had married Constantine's half-Minos sister Anastasia, and Papilius Nepotius the elder, who was married to another half-Minos sister, Eutropiae, were both killed. The military commander Ablabius, whose daughter Olympias was betrothed to the youngest imperial son, Constans, was also executed. Beyond these high-profile targets, countless other innocent people perished in the chaos. The prosperous imperial capital was instantly plunged into a storm of blood and a pall of darkness. If the text above is not shocking enough, let us add some more information to illustrate the tangled web of relationships. Constantius's own wife was the daughter of his uncle Julius, the very man he had just murdered. He had also previously married his own sister, Constantina, to his cousin Hannibal, whom he also had killed. But perhaps careful viewers will remember that the practice of sending one's father Minos in Minos law and brother Minos in Minos law to the great beyond was a precedent set by Constantine the Great himself. Perhaps Constantius II truly just wanted to learn from his father's example. Regardless of his motives, This horrific family tragedy reflected the complete and utter failure of Constantine's family agitation. His children had personally witnessed their father's acts of incestuous marriage arrangements, slaying. From a young age, they learned to be indifferent to family affection. From any perspective, this was a tragedy of the highest order. After this round of slaughter, the once thriving Constantinian dynasty was left with only 6 male members. Apart from Constantine's 3 sons, only the 2 young sons of the murdered Julius Constantius Gallus and Julian, and the young son of Eutropiae, Nepotius, survived. They were spared only because of their youth, and because the soldiers, having sated their bloodlust, were finally satisfied. If the spirits of Licinius and Maxentius, Constantine's vanquished rivals, were watching from the underworld, they would surely have given Constantius a triple life. He had, with effortless cruelty, accomplished a task that Constantine's enemies had dreamed of, but could never achieve. And this was not even the end of the Constantinian family's self-destruction. They would continue down this path of mutual annihilation. After the ripples of the palace bloodshed gradually subsided, on September 9, 337 AD, Constantius II traveled to Sirmium in Pannonia to meet with his 2 brothers, Constantine II and Constans. The 3 parties fully exchanged views on the recent family conflicts and affirmed the righteousness of Constantius's swift act of revenge. Following this, the 3 brothers formally divided the empire. The territories were partitioned according to the areas each had been assigned to govern by their father before his death. The lands previously ruled by their murdered cousin, the younger Dalmatius, were given to the youngest brother, Constans. Thus, the final division of their domains was as follows. Constantine II, the eldest, ruled the westernmost provinces Britain, Gaul, and Hispania. Constans, the youngest, ruled Italy, Pannonia, Macedonia, Dacia, and North Africa. Constantius II, the middle son, ruled all the eastern provinces, with direct responsibility for the defense of the eastern frontier against Persia. The jurisdiction over the new capital, Constantinople, became a point of contention. If divided strictly by administrative dioceses, it should have fallen to Constans. However, Constantius II had already established strong control over the city. Naturally, he would not give it up. After a prolonged period of overt and covert struggle, it was the elder Constantius who ultimately prevailed, securing control of the city of the world's desire. With the agreement reached, the 3 new emperors departed for their respective territories. The old era of Constantine the Great was definitively over. The new era of his successors had officially begun. The 3 newly enthroned brothers were ecstatic with their newfound power, but many more people wept at the end of an era of stability. Although Constantine's reforms were not always a blessing for the common people, whose lives remained impoverished, he had at least guaranteed a long period of internal peace. A well-defended frontier had also largely prevented large-scale barbarian raids. Constantine's death triggered a series of chain reactions. One bizarre echo was felt as far away as the territory of the later Zhao in what is now China. In the region of Anding, a man named Hu Yiguang declared himself the Buddha Crown Prince from the Great Qian, the Chinese name for the Roman Empire, and lead several thousand Roman legionaries in a rebellion against the tyrannical ruler Shi Hu. Unfortunately, they were outnumbered and ultimately failed, unable to transmit Constantine's ideals to the east. In short, the Roman Empire after Constantine's death was fraught with peril. If the great strategist Zhu Zhiliang had been in Rome at this time, he might have written a memorial to save the nation. The world is now divided into 3, and the strength of Rome is exhausted. This is truly a critical moment of life and death. Yet, the palace guards are slaughtered within, and the imperial uncles and cousins perished without, all because they were pursued and killed in the wake of the late emperor's cough in by your majesty. In essence, the spoiled and arrogant nature of the 3 August, I laid the groundwork for the fierce conflicts that would later erupt between them. What did this new era after Constantine's departure truly signify? On the economic front, without Constantine's strong hand to control it, the imperial economy accelerated its decline. Political stability was also a thing of the past. The very structure of a tripartite division of power increased the likelihood of political turmoil. The empire faced not only internal worries but also external threats. The barbarian tribes north of the Rhine and Danube rivers eyed Roman territory with covetous ambition. Of course, the most urgent threat came from the empire's east. More than 30 years earlier, Diocletian had signed the Treaty of Invades with Sasanian Persia in the fortress city of the same name in Mesopotamia. Since then, the heartland of the Persian Empire had been exposed to the threat of Roman armies, and the fortress of Invades was like a dagger held firmly at the throat of the Persians. Now, upon hearing of Constantine's death, the king of kings of the Sasanian Empire, Shaper II, immediately mobilized his army and marched swiftly towards Invades. A new round of the Roman-Persian wars, which would last for decades, was about to begin. At the same time, in the west, the ruler of the Western Empire, Constantine II, and his younger brother Constans were on a collision course, their conflict over territory escalating. Civil war was imminent, with foreign enemies at the gates and internal strife brewing. A more spectacular, unturbulent period of history was about to unfold before our eyes. How can a posthumous child, whose gender is not even certain, while still in his mother's womb, become the ruler of a nation? Who could achieve the feat of never leaving the throne from birth until death? The Sasanian Persian king Shaper II was just such a legendary monarch. From his birth in 309 AD until his death in 379 AD, Shaper II reigned for a full 70 years. He not only ushered in a golden age for the Sasanian dynasty, but also seized large territories from the Romans, frequently clashing with several famous Roman emperors and becoming a nightmare for a generation of Romans. It is said that when children cried in Mesopotamia, their parents would say, "If you cry again, Shaper will come and get you." How did Shaper ascend to the throne? And what fascinating stories unfolded between him and the Constantinian dynasty? Let's find out after this short break. As mentioned earlier, Diocletian signed the Treaty of Invades with the Sasanian king Narze in 299 AD. For the Persians, this was undoubtedly a humiliating treaty that ceded significant territory and influence. Narze, who presided over the treaty, was already old and died in 303 AD. His son, Hormizd succeeded him. It is said that he was cruel at the beginning of his reign, but gradually became benevolent. The Chronicle of the Prophets and Kings records the people had always feared him and suffered from his harsh rule. But he told his subjects that he was fully aware of the fear his severe and firm rule had caused them, and told them that he had exchanged his natural harshness and severity for gentleness and forgiveness. In the future, he would rule them in the most considerate way and in the most just manner. He longed to help and support the weak, to make the land prosperous, and to spread justice among his subjects. Hormizd, like his father, was committed to suppressing the nobility and strengthening royal power. During his short reign, he constantly campaigned against nobles who defied his authority. Hormizd also did not forget the humiliation his father had suffered and was determined to take revenge on the Romans. Around 309 AD, Hormizd led an army to attack the Gassanids, a Roman client kingdom. Operating on the principle of "I can't beat the Romans, but I can beat you," He launched a swift and overwhelming attack. The Ghassanid king was caught off guard, defeated, and killed. However, Hormizd died suddenly shortly after. Many suspected he was assassinated by domestic nobles. Subsequent events confirmed this suspicion. His eldest son, Adarnarsad, reigned for only a few months before being deposed and killed. His other sons were either killed or fled. To maintain long-term control over the state, the Persian nobles unanimously elected the unborn child in the womb of Queen Hormizd as the new ruler of the empire. They placed the royal crown on Aisha's abdomen, over the position of the fetus's head. The actual power was held by the Greek nobles. Soon Aisha gave birth successfully to a baby boy. He was the protagonist of our story, Shaper II. Shaper I was intelligent from a young age. It is said that one night, he was disturbed by noise in the royal palace in Constantine and could not sleep. He personally sought the source of the noise and found that it was caused by traffic congestion on the bridge over the Tigris River. He then ordered the construction of a new bridge. The two bridges were used for traffic in different directions, thus diverting the flow of pedestrians and solving the traffic congestion problem. As Shaper grew older, he became involved in more and more affairs. In 325 AD, at the age of 16, Shaper formally took the crown from his mother's hands and embarked on the path of a true king. Shaper's source of power was not legitimate, and he urgently needed a military victory to prove himself. The target of this special military operation was chosen to be the Arab tribes between Rome and Persia. At this time, the Arabs were frequently raiding the Persian province of Fars. The ancestral land of the Sasanian dynasty was under threat. Shaper I personally led a large army in a surprise attack, easily defeating the Arab raiders in the region of the river mouths of the Tigris and Euphrates. He then crossed the Persian Gulf to raid the Arab tribes' heartlands, marching all the way to Hira and then further into the Hira Mountains. There, he carried out large scale massacres, filled in wells, and cut off water sources. Shaper then turned his army towards Syria, dispersing the Bakr, Tag-Hill, and other tribes to the Persian rear to prevent them from allying with the Roman forces. In this special military operation, the Lakhmid king Imru al-Khays, who had originally been a Sasanian vassal, but later participated in the attack on Fars, fled to seek help from the Romans. He eventually died there, and the Lakhmid throne fell to other members of the royal family. Shaper I left a deep impression on the Arabs. It is said that they called him Dal-Atif, meaning he who pierces shoulders. Completing the special military operation against the Arab tribes proved Shaper I's outstanding ability and also greatly enhanced his prestige, consolidating his rule. The next target was the territory his grandfather had lost, Mesopotamia and the Kingdom of Armenia. However, the Roman emperor at this time was Constantine the Great. Snatching food from a tiger's mouth would certainly be very difficult. Moreover, Constantine had already designated a military plan to attack the Persian Empire. In 336 AD, Shaper I sent his general Narsad to lead an army to attack the Roman border fortress of Amida, and eventually succeeded in occupying it. The general responsible for local military affairs, Hannibal Enos, did nothing. Constantine had to send his son, Constantius, to lead troops to support, beginning a 20-year struggle with his nemesis, Shaper. Constantius, on his first campaign, performed brilliantly. He led the Roman legions to defeat and kill Arzad, not only completing the task given by his father to recover the lost territory, but also repairing the fortress of Amida and building a new city named after himself nearby, Antinopolis, further strengthening the border defenses. Faced with a strong enemy, Shaper II could only bide his time and quietly wait for an opportunity. He did not have to wait long. In 337 AD, the balance of power shifted from Rome to Persia. In that year, Rome's old friend, Tiridates of Armenia, had long since died. The Christian king of Armenia, Tyran, was overthrown by local nobles. Shaper basically controlled the situation in Armenia. And another piece of great news was that Constantine died suddenly in May of that year. The great mountain standing in the way of Shaper's dream of recovering his ancestral lands had collapsed. He did not hesitate for a moment, immediately mobilized his troops, and rushed towards the important stronghold on the Mesopotamian front, Nis Ibis. Upon hearing the news of the Persian invasion, the Eastern Emperor, Constantitius II, was not surprised. As early as 2 years before, his father had sent him to prepare for a war against Persia, recruiting and conscripting new soldiers, conducting training and exercises, expanding the cavalry, and stockpiling supplies. Faced with the aggressive actions of the Romans, Shaper II had sent his general Narseh to invade Armenia, but he was defeated and killed. Now, Armenia had fallen to Persia without a fight, and the fortress of Nis Ibis was under siege. The situation on the Roman Eastern Front suddenly became tense. However, at this time, Constantitius II was busy sending his uncles and cousins to report to God on the religious affairs of the world, so he could not spare himself to support the eastern border. The responsibility of defending the territory fell to the border garrisons. Shaper led the Persian army in a fierce attack on the city of Nis Ibis. The defenders in the city fought back bravely, and the battle was extremely fierce. Shaper besieged the city for more than 60 days, but still could not break it. Disease gradually spread in the Persian camp, and casualties increased sharply. In desperation, Shaper II withdrew his army. The first attempt to retake Nis Ibis had failed. In the following decade, Shaper II repeatedly fought and persevered, launching continuous attacks on the Mesopotamian defense line. The following year, Constantitius led his army to the front. He first sent troops to regain control of Armenia. Shaper II immediately responded by continuing to persecute the Christians within Persia. Control of Armenia changed hands repeatedly, and Roman-Persian relations completely broke down. In 343 AD, Constantitius led his army to raid the Persian front. Shortly after, Shaper II retaliated by besieging the important Roman city of Singara. Constantitius quickly led his army to relieve it, and the two sides fought outside the city of Singara. The Battle of Singara is the only battle in this round of the Roman-Persian wars whose course is recorded. Nevertheless, the details of this battle are still vague and full of controversy. Here, I will only describe what I believe to be the most reliable version. The Sasanian army should have had a numerical advantage. After the army of Constantitius II arrived at the front, Shaper, seeing that the enemy's forces were relatively small, ordered his soldiers to attack the Romans with full force. The fierce offensive of the Sasanian army initially achieved results, and the Roman line retreated slightly. But soon after, the situation on the battlefield was reversed. The Roman army gradually stood firm and, under the leadership of Constantitius, launched a counterattack. The Sasanian army retreated to the rear, and the Romans pursued them relentlessly, chasing them all the way to the enemy camp. A large number of Sasanian soldiers were killed, and the unprepared Sasanian prince, Shaper's son Narseh, also died in the chaos. But the Romans were also intoxicated by victory and fell into a frenzy of looting spoils. As night fell, Shaper II commanded his army to launch a counterattack, routing the Roman soldiers who remained in the camp. Regardless of which account reflects the true situation, this battle cannot be considered a success for either side. The Romans, in a defensive counterattack, suffered casualties comparable to the attackers. The Sasanian army, on the other hand, failed to achieve its original strategic objective and even lost the heir to the throne. In fact, this battle reflects the tone of the Roman-Persian War from 337 to 350 AD. Neither side was the final winner. In this period, the Roman and Persian sides fought a total of 9 major battles, and the core of the game was centered around the fortress of Nisibis. In 346 AD, Shaper II besieged Nisibis for the second time. After dozens of days of hard fighting, he once again withdrew his army in frustration. In 350 AD, the unkillable Shaper II besieged Nisibis for the third time. This time, the king was fully prepared. Taking advantage of the rainy season, he used the dam on the Mygdon River to launch a water attack on Nisibis. Persian ships could even sail directly to the city walls. After the flood receded, Shaper used catapults and other siege engines to bombard the walls. A breach was finally made in the fortress of Nisibis. Shaper II immediately ordered his army to charge forward, but the flood not only collapsed the city walls, but also made the road to the city muddy. The Persian army was bogged down in the mud and could not advance, forced to retreat. The defenders took advantage of this opportunity to carry out large scale construction work. In just one night, they repaired the city walls. The city of Nisibis was once again impregnable. Just at this time, news came that the Huns were invading the eastern provinces of Persia. Shaper II was suddenly faced with a dilemma. However, his old rival accordingly offered him a way out. The two sides hit it off and decided to maintain the status quo on the front line to show goodwill to each other. Shaper II, freed from the front line, quickly went east to fight the Huns. Constantitius also hurriedly left. He was going west to fight a usurper. This rebel was named Magni Antius. Constantine's youngest son, Constans, had died at his hands in that year. The Constantinian dynasty thus lost the vast territories of the Western Empire. What about Constantine II, the ruler of Gaul and Britain, you ask? He had died in fratricidal conflict 10 years earlier. Now, let's turn our lens back to the west to see what actions his two brothers took while Constantitius I was fighting Shaper on the front line, which ultimately led to their own deaths and the loss of their kingdoms. If your father is the supreme emperor of a country, and you are the emperor's eldest son, pampered from a young age and established as the heir to the empire, enjoying supreme glory, but as you grow up, your father becomes more partial to your younger brothers. They not only take away your father's love, but also divide the empire that should have been inherited by you alone into 3. Not only that, but the territory you are assigned is not the largest. You feel great injustice and humiliation. What should you do at this time? Constantine I had such a problem. He believed that as the eldest son of the empire, he should lead his 2 younger brothers, but his territory was located in the already declining western part of the empire. After the death of his cousin Almatias, Constantitius and Constans divided his Balkan territories. Constantine I did not gain any spoils in this process and was therefore extremely dissatisfied with the reality. Viewers who have watched the previous videos should know that Constantine I was not the late emperor's eldest son. The late emperor's most capable eldest son, Crispus, had unfortunately died at his own hands. Only then did Constantine I become the son minus called eldest son. In terms of ability, Constantine I was also inferior to his brother Constantitius, and if his awareness were a little higher, he would understand that the western part of the empire was the very place where his father had founded his great enterprise. But the arrogant and domineering Constantine I from a young age would not back down in the slightest. He resolutely demanded that Constans give up the province of Africa, because his brother had just obtained the rich regions of Macedonia and Greece. Only in this way would it be fair and compensate for the loss of Constantine, the elder brother. When Constans first ascended the throne, he was only 15 years old. Constantine II regarded himself as his brother's guardian and thought that obtaining a small province of Africa would be effortless. Who would have thought that Constans was also a person who was unwilling to suffer any loss? The two sides argued endlessly, and as Constans grew up, it was even more impossible for him to give up the meat that was already in his mouth. Constantine II, having gained nothing, was furious. Seeing that all negotiation tactics were useless, Constantine II secretly made up his mind. Since you are not willing to give it to me, I will take it myself. In 340 AD, driven by interests and incited by his confidence, Constantine II decided to personally attack his brother Constans. He led his own troops across the Alps, plundering and looting in northern Italy, all the way to Aquileia. At this time, Constans was in Dacia. His brother's surprise attack caught him off guard. He could only select a force of elite Illyrian troops to ambush Constantine on his inevitable path back to Constantine II's side. Although his army was large, its discipline was chaotic, and Constantine's own military command ability was also stretched to the limit. This mob, rather than being on a military operation in Italy, was more like a grand robbery. Constantine II, who had easily taken the towns of northern Italy, gradually relaxed his guard. The commander of Constance's vanguard, seeing this situation, sent a small detachment to actively harass Constantine and then feigned defeat. The hot-headed Constantine indeed fell for the trick. He led a small number of followers and pursued the small detachment, quickly entering the ambush circle. Constance's ambush troops rushed out from the woods. Constantine II was caught off guard and died unceremoniously in the chaos. His body was thrown into the Alsa River. The 17-year-old Constans unexpectedly unified the western territories of the empire. The eldest son of the Roman Empire, Constantine II, was suddenly defeated and killed. His two brothers, however, would not feel any sadness about this. Constans, having doubled his territory out of thin air, must have been dancing with joy. And Constantius in the east, who had personally sent away several blood relatives, would not be moved by family matters. Moreover, he was deeply mired in the war against the Sasanians in the east and had no power to intervene in western affairs. So what was Constance's rule like? In the early years of his reign, Constans was still able to fulfill his duties as emperor, driving out the barbarian raiders who had invaded Gaul and the province of Britain. But after only a few years, his true nature was exposed. Sextus Aurelius Victor, in his De Caesari Bus, describes Constans's character as follows: he was depraved beyond words, greedy and contemptuous of his soldiers. This is consistent with his usual persona. In religious matters, Constans was tolerant of Judaism. In 341 AD, issued an edict prohibiting pagan sacrifices. He supported the Nicene Orthodox faction and opposed Arianism. This created a conflict with his brother Constantius. Constans convened a council in Assi, Ardica in 343 AD to try to resolve the conflict. But could a young man, who was still wet behind the ears, unify Christianity, which even Constantine I could not unify? The religious conflict also made the relationship between the Eastern and Western emperors very delicate, even tense. There was also a widely circulated rumor that Constans was a homosexual. It should be known that both the Nicene Orthodox faction and the Arian faction regarded homosexuality as a sin. Constance's homosexuality may have been a smear by his rivals. But considering that he had no substantive formal marriage and no offspring, this accusation may be true. What truly made Constans lose the hearts of the people was his disregard for the army. He ignored the legions fighting on the Rhine and Danube frontiers and instead reveled with his favorite courtiers in daily feasts. There is also a saying that Constance's favorites were all Germanic captives, and the reason he chose these people was because they were young and charming. Combined with the previous accusation of Constance's homosexuality, I guess these Germanic captives were probably all strong young men. They must have been sparring with the emperor. Yes, it must have been like that. With the emperor so absurd, the army under his command was restless. And if an ambitious man appeared at this time, Constance's empire would come to an end. And this ambitious man soon appeared. His name was Magnentius. Magnentius was born in Sama, Riva in Gaul. His father was a Briton and his mother Frank. As a professional soldier, after leading troops for many years, he became the commander of Constance's personal guard. He acted appropriately in the army, had excellent interpersonal relationships, and was full of ambition. He had long been laying the groundwork in the army, often bestowing favors on the soldiers to gain more followers. In 350 AD, Magnentius's friend, the officer Marcellinus, used the pretext of celebrating his son's birthday to host a banquet for the various military and political officials living in the city of Aachen. Everyone drank and made merry until late at night. The guests talked freely without any scruples, deliberately saying some very dangerous and even rebellious things, and no one noticed anything unusual. Suddenly, the front door opened wide. Magnentius, after leaving for a while, returned like lightning, wearing the imperial crown and purple robe. The guests immediately hailed him with the titles of Augustus and Emperor. Among them were the planners of this event, but more people were just echoing in a drunken state, unknowingly signing their names. Thus, Magnentius obtained the support, or rather the leverage of everyone. He rose in rebellion against Constans from the city of Aachen. The young emperor had long since lost the hearts of the people. He was playing on hunting in the nearby mountains. After learning of the mutiny, he did not even dare to go to the nearby military camp. The ruler of a country had fallen to the point of having nowhere to go. He chose to bypass the cities and rush to the seaside, intending to escape by boat. However, the light cavalry sent by Magnentius were faster. Before reaching a seaport in Spain, they caught up with unkilled Constans near the Temple of Helena near the Purge. It is said that a prophecy at Constance's birth said that he would die in his grandmother's arms, and the place of his death was named after his grandmother, which can be considered a fulfillment of the old prophecy. After Constance's death, Magnentius quickly controlled most of the western territories of the empire. He stabilized the hearts of the people by rewarding the army with large amounts of gold and silver. However, his usurpation was also full of risks, because it was only 13 years since Constantine's death. The memory of Constantine the Great's power and prestige was still deeply imprinted in the minds of the empire's subjects. Killing Constantine's son was considered a sinful act. The regions of Italy and Illyria were unstable. Moreover, in the eastern part of the empire, there was a direct heir of Constantine, Constantius II, who had been tempered on the Persian front for more than 10 years and was battle-hardened. A new round of civil war for the unification of the empire was thus launched. After killing the Western Emperor, Constans, Magnentius knew that the rule of the Constantinian dynasty was deeply rooted and would inevitably suffer a fierce counterattack. So he opened the state treasury to try to win over the hearts of the people. But there were still many local officials who did not obey his leadership. The general of the Illyrian region, Paranoia, was a typical example. Vetranaio was born in the province of Mosia. He joined the army at a young age and was continuously promoted, eventually being promoted by Constans to be the commander of Illyria. After the coup of 350 AD, the imperial family member Constantina was in the Illyrian region. She immediately sought Vetranaio's protection and eventually personally placed the imperial crown on the general's head. Vetranaio then formally declared himself Caesar, breaking away from Magni Antiius's rule. Magni Antiius also quickly went to Illyria, trying to nip the separatist forces in the bud. However, at almost the same time, the only surviving male member of the Constantinian family, the son of Constantine's sister Eutropiae, Nepotius, was near the city of Rome. Seeing the situation, he acted decisively, leading a band of gladiators to march on Rome. The commander of the city of Rome was caught off guard after a symbolic resistance fled the city. Nepotius occupied the city of Rome and declared himself emperor. Magni Antiius was forced to abandon his plan to quickly pacify Illyria and sent Marcellinus to relieve Italy. Nepotius's gladiator army was too weak. In less than a month, Marcellinus successfully recovered the city of Rome. Nepotius was defeated and killed. His mother, Eutropiae, and many of his followers were executed or exiled. Magni Antiius issued a list of public enemies. Anyone who was related to the name and family of Constantine or was involved in the global resistance could not escape the sanctions. The situation in the West was changing rapidly, and Constantius needed time to return from the eastern border to the center. When he finally arrived at Heraclea in Thrace, the envoys of Magni Antiius and Vetranaio also arrived there. These two seemed to have reached some kind of agreement. The envoys proposed a wild idea: Constantius would marry Magni Antiius's daughter, and Constantina would marry Magni Antiius. From then on, the two families would be allied forever, and the Eastern Emperor would be recognized as having a higher status. And if Constantius was unwilling to maintain peace and chose the hard way, then the blame for starting the war would no longer be on our Western Emperor. Magni Antiius might have had such a thought: I only killed one of your brothers. You sent away 9 of your own relatives. Constantius temporarily put the proposal aside and convened a council of ministers to discuss it. During the meeting, he found an appropriate opportunity to give a speech to strengthen the determination of his soldiers to suppress the rebellion. Last night, when I returned to the palace to rest, the ghost of Constantine the Great, holding the body of my murdered brother, rose before my eyes. His familiar voice strengthened my determination for revenge, demanding that I not disappoint the public, and assuring me that I would obtain final victory and immortal glory. My army can wear the crown of justice. The emperor's statement set the tone for the event. Magni Antiius's legitimacy was fundamentally denied. Civil war was already inevitable. But before the real showdown, Constantius II still needed to do his best to win over the centrist Vetranaio. Although Vetranaio had reached some kind of peace agreement with Magni Antiius, this was ultimately a delaying tactic. He himself had grown up in the Constantinian era and was promoted and heavily used by Constans. He had received great favor from the state. Both emotionally and morally, he was more inclined to Constantius's side. But the cruel past of this former second emperor still made him hesitate and unable to make a final decision. Since the old comrade could not make a decision, only the young man Constantius could help him make it. The rebel-minus suppressing army set out from Thrace and continued to march west. Along the way, the towns of Dacia and Greece surrendered one after another. Constantius went straight to the border of Illyria. To avoid bloodshed, he personally made a righteous distinction between Vetranaio's and Magni Antiius's rebel groups, praising his courage in resisting the usurper. Vet ran Io then, according to Constantius's wishes, went to the border fortress for a meeting. The two sides held a grand joint military parade. Constantius, on a high platform in the center of the military and political gathering, delivered a powerful speech. He denounced Magni Entius for his ingratitude and betrayal of heaven. Then he mentioned the tragic death of his brother Constans, and was filled with grief. He proudly reviewed the glorious past and heroic achievements of the late emperor, Constantine the Great, and swore to the surrounding soldiers, "I am the son of Constantine the Great. I will inherit his glorious tradition." Constantius's confidant generals took the opportunity to create an atmosphere, doctor out the arrogant usurper. "Long live the son of Constantine. We only need to fly his banner, and we will be victorious in every battle." The atmosphere of the meeting was pushed to a climax. Faced with such a grand scene, Veteran Io was convinced. He took off the imperial crown he was wearing and, under the watchful eyes of everyone, prostrated himself at Constantius's feet. The young emperor gently asked the old man to get up from the ground and flattering, like called him old dad, personally helping him down from the throne. Constantius's performance at this meeting was perfect, and it became the highlight of his life. The Eastern army and the Illyrian army merged into one. They continued to march west together. When they arrived at the Sirmium region, Constantius appointed his surviving cousin, Gallus, to act on his behalf in Eastern affairs, and married his sister, Constantina, who had once been married to his cousin Hannibal Eunice to Gallus, hoping to stabilize the rear. Magni Entius would not sit idly by. He also gathered his army and marched east to resist. The two sides confronted each other in the northern region of Pannonia. The armies of both sides confronted each other on the plain between the Drava, Sava, and Danube rivers. This place was not far from Seba Lae, where Constantine had first defeated Lycians. Although Constantius I had a numerical advantage, he still built a series of defensive works around his camp and did not respond to the enemy's provocations on challenges to battle. Seeing that the royal army was unshakable, Magni Entius decided to take a different approach, sending troops to harass the cities of Sirmium and others in the rear. For the entire summer of 351 AD, the two sides spent their time in this standoff, and Magni Entius always held the initiative. The morale of Constantius's troops gradually declined. This last hope of the Constantinian family even once sent an envoy to try to sign a peace agreement with the usurper. Fortunately, it was rejected. Magni Entius even retorted, "You are not worthy to rule the Roman Empire at all. Unless you are willing to surrender, I will spare your life." However, the envoy still achieved some results. He was active in the enemy camp and persuaded a large number of cavalry to defect to Constantius. In September 351 AD, Magni Entius led his army to attack the city of Mirza on the Drava River. He set fire to the city gates, set up scaling ladders, and climbed the city walls. The brave defenders desperately extinguished the flames, and the two sides engaged in a fierce battle. The geographical location of Mirza was very important. Constantius II, who had been an ostrich for more than half a year, could no longer remain indifferent. He also led his main army to rescue the city of Mirza. Magni Entius, seeing this, withdrew from the siege and formed a line on the plain. The two sides fought a decisive battle in the suburbs of Mirza. On September 28, 351 AD, the two sides finally drew up their battle lines for a decisive battle. The battlefield around Mirza was an open plain with no cover. Constantius sent troops to occupy the higher ground. His right wing was supported by the Drava River, and his left wing occupied a favorable position, with the main cavalry deployed there. The cavalry line extended far out, surpassing the flank of Magni Antius's right wing. The two sides began to form their lines in the morning. Constantius II personally inspected the troops, gave a speech, and encouraged the soldiers to fight bravely. However, he did not personally command the battle. He went to a church not far from the battlefield and controlled the overall situation remotely, ordering his generals to command the battle on the front line. At the beginning of the battle, the cavalry of the Eastern Army very wisely charged forward from the left wing. The entire cavalry line moved forward in an oblique formation, sweeping over the right wing of the Western Army with the force of a thunderbolt. Caught off guard, they could not withstand the fierce charge, but the troops of the Western Army were also well trained. They soon stood firm and regrouped. The Germanic barbarian troops were brave by nature and fought back against the superior forces of the Eastern Army. The tactics planned by Constantius before the battle did not play a decisive role. The situation of the two sides became deadlocked and stabilized. The two sides, having lost their tactical advantage, evolved into a head-to-minus head melee. The entire battlefield was a river of blood, and the dust was flying. The casualties on both sides were very heavy. The heavy cavalry of the Eastern Army, like a group of giants cast in steel, their chainmail shining brightly, charged forward tenaciously with long spears, finally breaking through the Western Army's line. The Western Army, which was completely inferior in equipment and numbers, began to show loopholes in its formation. The second-minus line-like cavalry detachments of the Eastern Army were flexible and mobile, killing their way into the gaps formed by the enemy's retreat with long swords, deeply embedding themselves in the enemy's formation. The Western Army was suddenly in chaos. The large-scale Germanic infantry, having lost the cover of their formation, were completely exposed to the unerring fire of the Eastern archers. Unable to bear the casualties, the Western Army finally collapsed and retreated. To save their lives, they did not hesitate to throw themselves into the widened rapid current of the Drava River. The clamor of the battlefield continued until dark. The Western Army leader, Magni Antius, showed the demeanor of a general and a soldier, fighting until the situation was irreversible and the camp was occupied by the enemy. He was forced to abandon the royal regalia and retreat west. The pursuing troops entangled with him all the way into the Alps. At this time, Constantius was still visiting the tomb of a Christian martyr. After hearing the news of the victory, he took the opportunity to tell the Christians before him that his victory came from God's help and approval. The Battle of Mersey was by no means a resounding victory for Constantius II. In this bloody slaughter, a total of more than 54,000 battle-hardened Roman soldiers died, and the casualties of the Eastern Army were even more than those of the Western Army. These veterans with rich combat experience died in a civil war. They should have appeared in the battle against foreign invasion to defend their country, not sacrificed in vain like this. Constantius, facing his depleted troops, announced that he would rest first and continue the western expedition the following year. The Eastern Army then gradually pacified the remaining areas of Pannonia, at the same time sent envoys to Italy to solicit surrender. Upon learning of the defeat of the Western Army at Mersey, the cities of Italy were restless and one after another broke away from Magni Antius's rule. To show their allegiance to Constantius, they even formed an army to try to block the main force of the Western Army returning west. Magni Antius, seeing that he had lost the hearts of the people of Italy, led his army to easily defeat the Italian army, blocking the way, unsuccessfully retreated to Gaul. He also tried to sign a truce with Constantius, but was unsurprisingly rejected. In 352 AD, Constantius II led the Western Expeditionary Army into Italy. The local towns surrendered without a fight. The local military forces in North Africa and Hispania also declared their opposition to the regime. Constantinian was left with only his base in Gaul. He tried to gather the last resistance forces for a desperate struggle, so he ordered his brother, Constantinius, to come to his aid. But at this time, the Alemannian Franks on the other side of the river launched a large scale invasion along the Rhine. Trier, where Constantinius was located, was besieged. He was in danger himself and had no power to help. In 353 AD, the Western Expeditionary Army crossed the Alps. The two sides met at Mons Seleucus. Constantinius had been defeated repeatedly before and had long since lost the hearts of the people. He had no chance of winning against the high-spirited punitive army. There is no record in history of the specific process of this battle. Constantinius was ultimately defeated and chose to commit suicide. His brother Constantinius, after learning of his brother's death, also followed in his footsteps and hanged himself. Constantitius II, after a long period of hard fighting, finally completed the reunification of the empire again. However, under this happy appearance, the Roman Empire was becoming riddled with holes. The internal religious struggles of the empire were intensifying. Years of civil war had consumed a large number of elite military forces. The barbarian forces from all directions had broken through the border defenses of the empire in all directions. Constantitius II's own ability to govern the country was also far inferior to his father's. How would he govern this riddled country? To know what happens next, please listen to the next chapter. Only 16 years after the death of Constantine I, there was only one living son left in the Roman Empire, Constantitius II, and he had just completed the reunification of the empire again. The usurpers Constantinius and Constantinius had committed suicide in despair. The rebel planner Marcellinus had disappeared from history after the Battle of Marseilles. Constantitius II had won the final victory, but his purge had just begun. Every high-ranking official of the Western Army who had participated in the rebellion had to be investigated and tried. Whether they participated voluntarily or were forced to join, none were spared. In Britain, the emperor's special envoy, Paul, nicknamed the Chain, was ordered to hunt down the hidden rebels. Martin, the deputy administrative officer of Britannia, was very angry and critical of this harsh legal practice, so a series of criminal evidence was fabricated against him. The angry Martin tried to attack the royal envoy with his sword, but in the end, he could only choose to end his own life. Many subjects in the western part of the empire were implicated, either exiled to the frontier or their property confiscated. Some were executed, and some were even tortured. Among them, there were certainly some ill-intentioned, ambitious people, but most of them were innocent people caught up in the situation. After a round of hardy purges, Constantitius II ushered in his own era. How would he perform? In 354 AD, because Constantinius had previously mobilized a large number of garrisons along the Rhine and Danube, the Roman border defenses were now empty. The Franks and Alemanni took the opportunity to expand their occupation of Roman territory. The situation in Gaul was also unstable. There were even senior officials there who tried to declare themselves emperor. Constantitius II had previously handed over eastern affairs to his cousin Gallus, so he stayed in the western part of the empire to appease the people and lead his army to the border areas to drive out the invaders. Although he failed to recover the occupied areas, the barbarian troops at least did not continue to penetrate deep into the heartland of Gaul. However, when the emperor was planning further military action, rumors that the Caesar in the east, Gallus, was about to rebel appeared around the emperor. This instantly aroused the suspicion of the deeply suspicious Constantitius. He immediately chose to make a truce with the Alemanni and lead his army to Medialmana in northern Italy. Before narrating the grievances between Constantius and his cousin Gallus, let's first understand the emperor's governing style. When the late Emperor Constantine was still alive, the power politics he used were displayed before his children, subtly and profoundly influencing this generation of imperial heirs. From the beginning of his reign, Constantius II went on a killing spree. Along the way, he witnessed his own betrayal at his blood relatives, the betrayal of the elder brother to the younger brother, and the betrayal of the subject to the monarch. His heart could no longer build trust in anyone. He feared his capable military generals and did not trust his civil officials. So what kind of people were worthy of his trust? These people must have no ambition, no grand ideal of becoming king or emperor. So what kind of people met his requirements? Many viewers may have already guessed eunuchs who had no next generation to inherit their wealth. Eunuchs were a product of the autocratic system. Roman eunuchs had appeared as early as the beginning of the Christian era. In the Augustan era, these castrated men were seen as monsters, serving the Queen of Egypt. Later, they gradually entered the families of noble women and retired senators, and then into the emperor's court. Domitian and Nerva had issued edicts to strictly restrict them. Diocletian, on the other hand, attached great importance to the role of eunuchs. In the Constantinian era, eunuchs were once again relegated to the lowest status. But with the deepening of the autocratic system of the Roman Empire, the power of eunuchs was difficult to suppress. Finally, in the court of Constantius II, they stood firm. Eunuchs were usually good at flattery and conspiracy, playing with the emperor's emotions in the palm of their hands. They intercepted the petitions of victims to the emperor and obtained great wealth through corruption and the sale of official positions. New ambitious people bought special powers from their hands with heavy gold to improve their status. And because of their physical disabilities, eunuchs were particularly happy to persecute those healthy and upright gentlemen. The most famous of the eunuchs was the emperor's grand chamberlain, Eusebius. This is the third Eusebius we have mentioned. In addition, this eunuch was a supporter of the Arian faction and had met with the Pope of Rome. Everyone must distinguish this eunuch Eusebius from the other two Bishop Eusebiuses. This 9,000 year old of the Roman Empire also played an important role in the subsequent Gallus case. To sum up the ruling style of Constantius II, this emperor was suspicious by nature and heavily used eunuchs. If you became his subject, you had to act cautiously, as if walking on thin ice. Even so, if you accidentally offended the eunuchs around him, the emperor would become suspicious under the influence of slander. And Gallus actively jumped into this deep pit. Gallus's specific performance in the eastern part of the empire is full of controversy. In his childhood, he witnessed his father and brother being killed by his cousin. He grew up in a lonely environment. His heart was not cared for, and his bad habits were not guided and corrected. We often say that an unfortunate childhood needs a lifetime to heal. Gallus, who had lived in darkness since childhood, probably developed a gloomy, violent, and perverse character. Having endured for many years, he lost his compassion and magnanimity, and harbored a vengeful mentality. Towards his close staff, or when he was mature, he would sometimes have uncontrollable fits of rage, even threatening their lives. His wife was his cousin, Constantina, who was at least 10 years older than him. This eldest princess inherited her grandmother, Helena's strong political skills, but not her grandmother's loving heart. Ancient historical materials evaluate her as a cruel and violent political woman. Constantine not only supported her husband, who had a personality defect in implementing policies with logical flaws, but also largely added fuel to the fire. It is said that she once, for the bribe of a pearl necklace, ruthlessly executed an innocent and well-minded behaved nobleman, without distinguishing right from wrong. Gallus's private residence in Antioch and public places were full of spies and informers. He himself would also wear civilian clothes to make unannounced visits to gather information. The court was full of murder weapons and instruments of torture. The atmosphere of the Eastern court was thus gloomy. The description of Gallus's evil deeds is not absolutely credible. But whether he was as cruel and tyrannical as described above, the real person responsible can only be Constantitius II himself. By imprisoning Gallus in his childhood and not letting him see the light of day, good virtues had nothing to do with him. When Constantitius was young, he personally killed his cousin's father and brother. Now it was his turn. The Praetorian prefect of Syria, Theophilus, was killed by the people of Antioch due to a food shortage. Many people suspected that these people were not ordinary people, and suspected that this was Gallus's handiwork. So a flurry of complaint letters flew to the court of Constantitius II. The emperor immediately sent the Eastern general Domitian, and the court treasurer, Montius, to Antioch to investigate the matter. Before they left, they were specially instructed to act with caution. But Domitianus obviously did not listen to the emperor's instructions. The moment he arrived in Antioch, he always had a look of disdain on his face. For several days, he refused to see the Caesar on the pretext of illness. He also secretly wrote a report that fanned the flames and sent it to the emperor in the west. He reluctantly went to a meeting only after Gallus's repeated invitations, but he did not put Gallus in his eyes at all, and extremely arrogantly threatened Gallus to go to see the emperor immediately. If he dared to delay in the slightest, it would be a violation of the law. Domitianus's blatant provocation made Gallus and Constantina extremely angry. They immediately ordered the guards to take Domitianus down and imprison him. Although the relationship between the two sides was very tense at this time, there was still room for mediation. However, the pig teammate Montius further added fuel to the fire. He arrogantly accused Gallus. "How dare you, a mere Caesar, privately imprison a court official? Don't you want to live?" The enraged Gallus convened a joint meeting of military and political officials, demanding that the two representatives explain their crimes. But how could these two arrogant envoys lower their noble heads? Now Gallus completely broke down. He ordered the guards to be fully armed and gathered the people of Antioch, at the same time arousing everyone's fanatical emotions. The two people before you have insulted and want to murder your Caesar. The irrational crowd dragged the two men out, tied their legs with ropes, and dragged them through the streets of the city. Amidst curses, the two men were tortured until they were covered in wounds. Their bloody and mangled bodies were thrown into the Orontes River. The investigation team that came to investigate the murder of the people was also killed by the people. This is really black humor. Hey, didn't we say before that Gallus was unpopular? Then why were his people so angry? Upon learning that his envoys were killed by a mob, Constantitius II was emotionally stable. As if nothing had happened, he wrote a family letter to Gallus. In the letter, he fully expressed his sincere affection for Gallus and his concern for him. But in the end, he revealed his true intentions. He advised the Caesar to fulfill his duties as a high minus ranking official and to share the burden of military and state affairs for him. He said that his court was quite large and invited him to come and assist him personally. Gallus was also horrified to find that Constantitius had, without his knowledge, transferred many troops stationed in Asia Minor. This showed that he had no control over the eastern situation at all and had no capital to launch a civil war. Gallus's tribune, Scudilo, claimed that the emperor's summons this time was to promote him to Augustus. Faced with threats and inducements, Gallus still set out. His wife, Constantina, went with him to the west so that she could use her political influence to protect Gallus. But heaven did not grant their wish. When the procession reached Bithynia, Constantine suddenly died. Gallus suddenly became hesitant. Then he made a lot of confusing moves. He greatly expanded his entourage and held a grand chariot race in Constantinople, and made the act of crowning the winner, which only an Augustus could do. Gallus's arrogant actions completely angered Constantius. When Gallus arrived at Hadrianopolis, he ordered him to only lead a small detachment to see him from then on. At the same time, he withdrew the army that was responsible for protecting the Caesar along the way. After stopping and starting on the road for a long time, Gallus finally arrived at Purge in Noricum. Here, he was placed under house arrest and stripped of his title of Caesar. Soon after, he was sent to a vibrant city, Pola. Constantius chose this place perhaps to pay tribute to his father. After all, Constantine had executed his eldest son, Crispus, here. Unfortunately, Constantius had no son for him to execute. Gallus, who arrived at Pola, was extremely frightened. He had of course heard of the tragic fate of his cousin, and when the person responsible for trying him next, the famous eunuch, the famous eunuch Eusebius, appeared, Gallus knew that his death was imminent. During the interrogation, Gallus blamed all the faults on his deceased wife. This undoubtedly touched the emperor's sore spot. The death sentence was thus issued. But Constantius II seemed to realize that his family members were almost all killed by himself, so he cancelled the sentence. However, Eusebius, who was on the judge's bench, did not care whether he would change his mind. He rushed to execute Gallus before the order arrived. I don't know why Eusebius hated Gallus so much, but his malicious actions against the young Caesar were always seen by one person, and in the future, someone would pay the price for this. Constantius II had eliminated another family member, but the crisis he faced was intensifying. The Alemanni, Franks, and Goths in the north, and Shaper II in the east, had also resolved the threat of the nomadic peoples in the eastern Landing to make a comeback at any time. In August 355 AD, the Gallic general Silvanus rebelled and declared himself Augustus. Silvanus's betrayal was also forced. He had surrendered to Constantius after the Battle of Marsala, was soon appointed military commander of Gaul. He stabilized the Gallic border by bribing the barbarians with money, but he was framed by the emperor's court. Constantius listened to slander, dismissed Silvanus from his post, and recalled him. The angry Silvanus rebelled, but the emperor's next operation was a stroke of genius. He wrote another letter to Silvanus, summoning him back to Mediomena. In the letter, he did not mention his rebellion at all. Silvanus was perhaps completely confused by the emperor's operation and did not take any meaningful action in the following period, and the commissioner sent by the emperor, Ursicinus, took the opportunity to operate, subverted Silvanus's army, and then killed him. And this was only 20-8 days after he claimed the title of emperor. However, despite easily eliminating the threat of civil war, Constantius II still realized that he alone could not rule such a vast empire. Before he was about to go east to continue to fight his old enemy Shaper II, he still needed to appoint a Caesar to stabilize the western part of the empire. This Caesar could not have a complex political foundation, but needed to have the blood of Constantine to ensure the rule of the family. He also needed to be a male. So who should be chosen? In fact, this was not a choice at all, because at this time, apart from Constantius II himself, there was only one male member of the Constantinian family left. That was the youngest son of Dalmatius, Gallus's younger brother Julian. In 355 AD, after Constantius II and Julian parted ways, he stayed in Italy for 18 months. During this period, he mainly dealt with the Rhaetian border crisis and religious affairs, persecuting the Nicene Orthodox faction and vigorously promoting Arianism. And as the war on the eastern front of the empire broke out again, Constantius was forced to leave the west to resist the comeback of Shabraii. But before that, he had to do one more thing: led a large procession to inspect the ancient capital of the empire, Rome. In April 357 AD, on the eve of the Battle of Argentoridum, Constantius, I led a large procession from Mediomena along the Aemilian and Flaminian ways to the city of Rome. When approaching the city, the emperor ordered the procession to form a triumphal procession. Civil and military officials, gorgeously dressed in resplendent attendants, accompanied by armored guards and the imperial seal. Constantius himself rode alone, in a chariot inlaid with gold and precious stones. When he passed through the city gate of Rome, he bowed his head to the people, always maintaining a solemn expression, sitting securely and motionless. The officials and senators of Rome were all present to welcome him. Countless people lined the streets. The last time they had seen the emperor of the empire was 30-2 years ago, with Constantine. The crowd was boiling with excitement, shouting "Long live!" Constantius was surprised that he was so popular. It seemed as if the whole world had suddenly gathered here. Constantius lived in the palace of Augustus, presided over the meetings of the Senate, and talked with the senators on the rostrum where Cicero often spoke. He held grand games in the Circus Maximus and eventually won. He visited many attractions: the 7 hills of Rome, the majestic Capitoline Temple, the large Minas-scale baths of Caracalla and Diocletian, the simple and symmetrical Pantheon, the magnificent Colosseum of Titus, the elegant Theater of Pompey, and the Temple of Peace, and the most spectacular of all, the Forum of Trajan and its commemorative column. Constantius, a monarch of the late 4th century, had browsed through the 1,000-year history of the city of Rome in a month. I wonder what he was thinking in his heart. To show his merits, he decided to inherit his father's last wish, gave the obelisk in front of the Temple of the Sun in Heliopolis, Egypt, to the people of Rome, and erected it in the Circus Maximus. Constantius, I stayed in Rome for only 30 days when he suddenly received news that the Illyrian border was being invaded. He hastily ended his only trip to Rome in his life. The Dacia region across the Danube, after Constantine's reconquest, had only been maintained for more than 10 years and was now completely lost. The Sarmatians and Quadi crossed the Danube and Drae-Minus entered Illyria. Constantius led his army to relieve them, easily defeating the invaders. At the same time, he crossed the Danube and brought the war to the invaders' homeland. The demoralized barbarians immediately surrendered, begging for peace and willing to return the captured Roman subjects, and sending hostages to the emperor to ensure their loyalty. In the emperor's tent, there were even envoys from tribes as far away as the Carpathian Mountains and the northern regions of present Minas-Day Poland. Constantius II, with his strategic planning, Rae-Minus supported the heavily damaged Sarmatians, and the area near the Roman border supported the chieftain Zii as the king of the Sarmatians, in the hope of alleviating the border troubles in Illyria. Constantius also decided to pick a lucky one to make an example of. In the end, he chose the Limi Giantes between the Danube and the Tisza rivers. When the Roman army approached, the Limi Giantes tried to use a feigned surrender to buy time, but the emperor did not give them a chance and launched a fierce military operation. All who dared to resist were killed. The Limi Giantes asked the emperor to give them a piece of Roman land to live on, and in the future, they would provide supplies and soldiers for Rome for generations. Just like the previous tribe, the emperor hosted a banquet on a plain on the south bank of the Danube to entertain the surrendered Limi Giantes, who knew that during the banquet a barbarian suddenly threw his shoe into the air and shouted Marha, Marha, sending a signal to the surrounding tribes. They rushed forward angrily, trying to directly capture the emperor himself and carry out a decapitation strike on the Roman army. But the guards fought desperately, and the emperor was able to mount a fast horse and speed away, having refused the toast and chosen the forfeit. The Limigiantes were now completely on the road to destruction. Under the physical cleansing of the Romans, they became a part of history. Just as the Illyrian border troubles were resolved, the eastern front suddenly became tense. In 358 AD, Shaper I sent an envoy to Sirmium to have an audience with Emperor Constantitius and discuss the eastern border issue. But the letter he brought was extremely arrogant. Shaper, king of kings, brother of the sun and moon, sends greetings to his brother, Constantitius Caesar. I am very pleased that you Romans, after the lessons of natural and man-made disasters, have become more polite and well-behaved. As the legal heir of Darius hissed as P.S. I solemnly declare that the Astraimon River in Macedonia is the true ancient border of our empire. That is to say, your capital is also an inalienable part of the Persian Empire since ancient times. Of course, to maintain world peace, I am willing to make great concessions. You only need to cede the provinces of Armenia and Mesopotamia to us Persians. Moreover, these areas were all seized from my ancestors by the Romans using fraudulent tricks. If you agree, we will still be brotherly states in the future, as harmonious as you and your family. If you cannot return these disputed territories, I am afraid I will not sign any peace treaty with you. If my envoy returns empty-handed without a promise, then I will come to Mesopotamia myself in the spring to receive your gift. The envoy, Nars-Ad, did his best to change the wording of the letter to make Shaper II's demands sound softer. Constantitius convened a meeting to discuss the matter and then used an official reply to dismiss the Persian envoy. The Roman emperor has the right to refuse to accept the informal statement of the minister sent. His words are not important enough to disturb the emperor. However, our emperor is not opposed to a treaty that is conducive to peace. But some countries, taking advantage of the empire's eastern power, directly put forward such absurd proposals in front of the emperor of the empire. We strongly condemn the arrogance and rudeness of the Cossacks and authorities. The situation on the battlefield is ever-changing. Shaper should remember that the Romans sometimes do lose battles, but the final victory always belongs to us. The first round of verbal attacks was over. Constantitius I sent an eloquent envoy to Kassitsan to try to stabilize this unstable factor in the east. But under the instigation and incitement of the Roman renegade Antonius, Shaper, who had returned victorious from his campaign against the Huns, still decided to continue the campaign. Of course, even without the opinions of others, Shaper himself must have wanted to recover the territory of Mesopotamia. A new round of the Roman-Persian War was about to begin. In the summer of 358 AD, a severe earthquake occurred in Western Asia Minor, and many cities were destroyed. This seemed to portend that an ominous event was about to happen. In 359 AD, Shaper II formally led his army on a western expedition. He led a large army of about 100,000 troops, including many Central Asian leaders and Caucasian states, and quickly arrived at the Euphrates River crossing. Under the guidance of the Roman renegade, Shaper II chose not to get bogged down in the fortress of Nisibis, but to march along the Euphrates River and directly insert into the weak points behind the Roman defense line. However, they also faced many difficulties. The Romans had implemented a scorched-earth policy before the arrival of the Persian army. All the grain and fodder in the entire area were burned. Sharpened wooden stakes were driven into the fords of the rivers, and strong fortifications were built. Various projectile weapons and crossbows were deployed on the other side of the Euphrates River. Seeing this, the Persian army gave up the plan to cross the Euphrates River and instead went up the river till its source, where the river was shallow enough to be forded. The Persian army thus arrived at Amida, near the city of Diyarbakir. The king of the Chionites sent his only son to the city to persuade it to surrender, but he was killed by an arrow from the defenders. The angry Persians immediately launched a siege. The fortress of Amida was easy to attack and difficult to defend. The nearby water network was extensive. Emperor Constantius had recently given his name to Amida as a supreme honor. The strength of the walls of Amida was increased, and high towers were built to enhance the overall defense. An armory was also set up to supply various projectile machines. When this place was surrounded by Shaper's large army, the number of defenders was completely sufficient to fill the city walls. Shaper designated the siege camps for each army. The Vertae were on the south, the Albanians on the north, the grief-stricken Chionites on the east, and the Segestini on the west. The latter were brave warriors from India. The second line around the city was deployed with Persian troops as a follow-up force. When the first line engineering troops were exhausted, Shaper, in full armor, personally supervised the siege. The Persian army launched one charge after another, but was ultimately repulsed under fierce resistance. The defenders could even launch counter charges and continuous night raids. The Persian siege troops suffered heavy casualties. During the siege, a Roman deserter pointed out to the Persians a small path carved out of a cliff for drawing water. This cliff stood by the stream of the Tigris River. Shaper immediately sent 70 archers, selected from the royal guard, to quietly climb the cliff and control the 3-story wooden tower. Then they raised the Persian flag at the highest point. Although these men were soon annihilated by the defenders, this move successfully hit the morale of the Romans. Shaper could not break the city by force or surprise attack, so he had to conduct a long siege. He learned siege techniques from Roman deserters. The engineering troops dug deep trenches around the city from all directions to push the soldiers to destroy the foundations of the city walls. At the same time, they began to build engineering towers, the height of which was level with the city walls, so that the soldiers could engage with the troops defending the fortress. Shaper's siege engines were destroyed more than once by the Romans' fire attacks, but the defenders, troops, supplies, and morale were also gradually exhausted. The battering ram knocked out a large gap in the city wall. The city's defenders, in the days of fierce fighting and the attack of the epidemic, were almost all killed or wounded. The city of Amida finally fell after holding out for 70-3 days. The city's inhabitants, regardless of gender or age, were all massacred. Although he successfully occupied Amida, Shaper I soon recovered from the joy of victory. The financial report of this campaign was enough to make the Sasanian stock price plummet. About 30,000 elite soldiers were buried under the city walls. The combat power of Persia's allies also suffered huge casualties, and winter was approaching. To avoid greater casualties, Shaper II, after destroying Amida, returned to Sitsa. It was not until the following spring that Shaper regrouped and returned to the front, taking Sing-Eran-Bzabd in one fell swoop. The fortress of Nisibis, which had successfully blocked Shaper 3 times, finally fell into the hands of the Persians. The Mesopotamian defense line of the Roman Empire had collapsed. Seeing this, we can't help but ask, where were the reinforcements of the Roman emperor? The general of the eastern part of the empire, Ursicinus, was originally near the front line. However, at this critical moment, he was dismissed and investigated by the emperor due to the slander of the eunuchs. The military command of the Eastern Front was handed over to the inexperienced Sabinianus. The eunuch supervising the army on the front line did not stop his operations and transferred Ursi back to the border, ordering him to atone for his crimes. Sabinianus himself stayed in the city of Edessa, doing nothing, keeping all the fresh troops by his side, making Ursi unable to rescue Amide, and later Nis Ibis. After the war, Ursi was found guilty after an investigation and was dismissed from his military post. Constantitius II himself, after completing his military operations against the Danube barbarians, began to march slowly to the east. His large army, after passing through the ruins of Amide, tried to recover the lost territory, but with the rainy season approaching, the emperor had no choice but to lift the siege and leave. Constantitius had had the upper hand on the Eastern Front for the first 20 years, but unexpectedly, he was completely defeated in the last 2 years, and all his efforts were in vain. While Constantitius I was losing ground on the Eastern Front, Julian was achieving repeated successes in Gaul. The reputations of the two were reversed. This sharp contrast once again aroused Constantitius's suspicion. Just at this time, Empress Eusebia, who had been childless for many years, accepted fertility treatment. She died shortly after taking the fertility drug. Constantitius then married Faustina. Julian's only supporter in the court was thus gone. The eunuch clique, especially Eusebius, who had executed Gallus, saw the opportunity and once again began to sow discord between the two emperors. After a long period of secret struggle, in February 360 AD, news came from Gaul. Julian had declared himself Augustus of the empire, officially breaking with Constantitius II.